Hi, I'm Tyler Perry, a high school English language arts teacher and poet. And I just wanted to tell you about a new teaching resource that I've created, which accompanies my latest book of poetry, Plausible Wrong Answers. So I will just show you. So my latest book of poetry is, as I said, Plausible Wrong Answers. And as you can see here, it is a poetic dismantling of the high school multiple choice reading comprehension test, in which I've used found text from standardized exams and government curricula as a springboard for linguistic creation. The poems are further enriched through the haunting visual artwork of Anna Navarro. Anna's evocative drawings weave among the poems, engaging with the language to reveal complex layers of meaning. So basically, as a teacher of English language arts and as a poet, I found in speaking with a lot of other English language arts teachers that many teachers find it a challenge knowing how to properly approach poetry or how to approach poetry at all. A lot of teachers can find it intimidating or they just don't know where to start. And so after having written this book of poems, and speaking with teachers who were interested in teaching poetry, I thought it would be very helpful if a contemporary book of poetry had a teacher resource to go with it. So I've created a couple of resources, and this one is actually a standalone unit. And if you look here, you don't even need the book in order to make use of this. It introduces students to 3 types of response poems. And one of the most fun, I find, and engaging ways to get students into poetry is to provide them with examples of poetry and then allow those poems to become models for students to have fun with and write their own pieces, also known as mentor texts, I suppose. So the 3 different types of response poems that you'll be introduced to in this unit are the glossa, and this has hyperlinks as well. So if you look here, I've got hyperlinks to some other poetry resources here. This one being the Poetry and Voice, which is my personal favorite place to go for poetry lessons. So it's a hyper doc, and we have an explanation of the form of poetry, rules on how to do it, and then a guide through the activity. So the activity here is to read examples of the type of poem, and then to use the prompt to write poems of their own. So this link brings you to an Emily Dickinson poem, and then it shows a glossa poem that is written in response to that poem, which comes from Plausible Wrong Answers. And then there are further enrichment activities in here as well. The second type of response poem is called a distractor poem, which is a new type of response poem that I created. And that is where the dismantling of the standardized test comes in. Distractor is a form of poetry, which is a response to my frustration in the tendency for standardized reading comprehension tests to completely change our purpose for reading a poem. The moment we read a poem in search of the right answer, we stop reading a poem and start reading a test. Distractors are a method of turning the test back on itself in a way that, rather than shutting down possibilities, allows new ones to blossom. So a distractor takes questions from multiple choice tests as springboards for poetic creation rather than critical analysis. And these are the constraints of the distractor. I won't dwell on them too much because you can easily get to this document. It's a free resource on Teacher Pay Teachers. It's a free download, and I'll include the link in the description to this video. So you can feel free to check that out. But these are the rules of a distractor poem, or the constraints of a distractor poem. And then there's an example of one at the end of the document. So this poem is from Plausible Wrong Answers, but I've included it in this packet so that you don't need to buy the book to use it. These are the steps. And again, there's hyperlinks to everything you need for the activity. Okay. Then we have the third type of response poem, which is the multiple choice question, which is another form that appears in the book. And that's basically writing multiple choice questions on poems, poems that have already been written or poems that you've written yourself. And in the case of Plausible Wrong Answers, the questions are written about the poems themselves. And so here are the constraints of the multiple choice question, as well as a hyper link to a brainstorming thing here, which you can feel free to use if you're inclined that way, and also instructions on how to write multiple choice test questions, which are handy for anyone wanting to write multiple choice questions. And this is just a link from the internet. Okay, and again, we have these poems included in the packet and activities for further enrichment. Okay, and at the bottom here, this is my glossa, which is a response to the Emily Dickinson poem, I Felt a Funeral in My Brain. It's called The Funeral in Her Brain. And once you read the constraints of the glossa, you'll understand, but basically it starts with 4 lines from the original poem, and then these lines are then included as the last line to each stanza. So, and then the 9 lines leading up to it are original lines written by the current poet who's responding through glossa form, okay? This is the distractor poem that's included in here. It's called How to Bathe a Child. And as you can see, this question was taken from a standardized test, and then the poem is written as a response to that question. So this is not the original poem by Seamus Haney, but it's a new poem written in response to the question. And and there's another one there. So there are a couple examples of the distractor poems. There's a whole section of them in the book. And then this is an example of the multiple choice question. So here is an original poem. This poem was originally published in Grain magazine and is also in Plausible Wrong Answers, but with an accompanying set of questions, or an accompanying question with a set of responses. And that is this resource. Oh, and there's another one here. Okay, again, same thing. So again, if you're scrambling for ideas on how to teach a short little poetry unit, or how to get students into poetry, please feel free to go to Teachers Pay Teachers and you'll find it. This is the poetry unit right here. It's just a free download, and you can download it and use it, share it with your students. If you're the type of teacher who likes to take and modify things, then you can get in touch with me. I can share a Google Doc with you, and you can make your own copy and play around with it as you'd like. The second resource here, and I won't go through this whole thing because it is quite long. It's the Teacher's Guide to the Full Book. And so for teachers who decide they'd like to teach Plausible Wrong Answers as a full class book study, which I know so far at least one teacher has done with, I believe, great success, then here is the teacher's guide that goes with it. And this teacher's guide can, basically it's ready to use teacher's unit for the book Plausible Wrong Answers, and it's filled with activities that range from creative written responses, writing their own poems, to critical analytical responses to poems. And this again is a hyperdoc, and so you can jump back and forth within this document, right? But if you look at the table of contents, we have, first of all, information on how to get the book. This is the publisher, but also if you're looking for individual copies, go to your local bookstore. If you must order online, order through Frontenac House because they will send it to you with free shipping. But support your local bookstores. In Calgary, that is Pages in Kensington, Shelf Life Books, The Next Page, and Owl's Nest. In Edmonton, that is Glass Bookshop and Audrey's, I believe. They can all get it for you. So go there first. And I know, at least in Calgary, I know that they're doing curbside pickup and delivery in a lot of cases. So anyway, here is the table of contents. So we have an introduction which explains kind of how to go about reading and teaching a full book of poetry, which is something that a lot of people could use a little bit of help with, kind of understanding how we should approach reading a book of poetry and how it's different from reading a novel or another form of literature. And so that'll be there. And then there's tips for students to get the most out of their reading of poetry. And then a whole list of lessons. So I think this is a fun one. There's a test in the book, which is meant as kind of an ironic test, but I've created a way for them to actually write the test and see how they do on it, which can be a fun sort of intro activity. And it's a Google Doc. You just make a copy of it and they can fill out their answers there, and that can be a good intro into the book and a discussion about the nature of poetry and the nature of multiple choice reading comprehension tests and the nature of knowledge, which I think could generate a lot of good discussion. And then we have all of these lessons here. So as you can see, there are 11 individual lesson plans. Each of them could easily, well, some of them are shorter than others, but there are many of these that could easily take up a couple of full classes of your time. There are, as I mentioned, there are illustrations in the book. And so in the full book version of the teacher's resource, you can actually, there are activities that involve looking at the illustrations and how they work with the writing, and then responses that allow students to create their own visual responses as well. So there's poetic text creation, and there's personal writing, critical analytical essay writing, and creative response. So yeah, I won't scroll through everything. If you want more, then just go. You can find this on Paid Teachers too. I've just put up recently as well. It's just under my account, Tyler Perry, and so yeah, this whole thing is here for a free download. Again, they're both free, so go check it out. Check it out. And if you have any questions on this, feel free to contact me. If you, again, as I said, if you're interested in purchasing the book, then do so through your local bookstore or through the Frontenac House website. And I will put links, all the important links in the video description. Thanks for watching if you stuck through to the end, and enjoy teaching poetry. Thanks.